On May 7th, they've cleared the last of the ice. Traveling an average of 50 miles a day, hugging the icy north shore of Lake Huron, Verlin and Clint reach Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan on Tuesday, May 11th, and find themselves racing this big black canoe. They lose the race with this big canoe, but it's good comic relief and very welcome relief. Let's try that racing stroke again with some special secret additives. And there it is, the miracle elixir. Now we'll race that big black canoe again. Harry C., here we come. Verlin and Clint use the Waddell Waddle on this portage, and they seem almost desperate to get somewhere important, especially Clint, who begins portaging with unusual haste ahead of Verlin. Now there, folks, is the stride of a man with a mission. You'll be relieved to know that Verlin didn't portage through the lobby. Now they head for one of the most perilous and unpredictable portions of their long canoe safari, the cold, dangerous waters of Lake Superior. Verlin and Clint talk with many people at the Sioux Locks, and no one can tell them how to canoe across Lake Superior. They make the trip anyway, battling fog, wind, and waves, some 470 miles in 14 days. Grand Portage. It was the original site of the annual Traders and Trappers Rendezvous. But after the War of 1812, the Northwest Fur Company decided to move the site 50 miles north to Fort Williams. The loaded Montreal canoe had only 6 inches of birch bark from its top edge to the water, as in this modern reenactment. The man guiding in the stern, where you can see the flag of the Northwest Fur Company flying, was the gouvernail. His counterpart in the bow was the avant, and each was responsible for steering the canoe. These two men had paddles of 7 to 9 feet long, while the millier, or paddlers sitting close to the water line in the middle of the canoe, had short, narrow paddles designed to push off the rocks and aid in beaching as well as paddling. In addition to traditional voyageur costumes, those reenacting the move recreate a more personal aspect of the voyageur past. They're thirsty, and so it's time to tap a keg of liquid history. Voyageur High Wine, a burgundy concoction welcomed by all, in tin cups or even in a yellow plastic bucket that's obviously historically inaccurate, but shared by everybody just the same.
Words cannot describe the beauty of an early morning mist. The waters assume an intimacy that seems to make time itself stand still, and only the feeling of the mist on his face reminds a man that he is still a creature of this earth.
The big Montreal canoes were equipped with sails to take advantage of favorable winds on open waters. And the Canadians, reenacting the historic move, like their voyageur predecessors, prove themselves quite adept at converting the elements to their own advantage. The Canadian government is rebuilding old Fort Williams as an historical site near Thunder Bay. And our modern-day voyageurs are bringing, among other things, a Northwest Fur Company flag to the celebration. Beams for the reconstruction are brought ashore from their canoes by the reenactment party. Prime Minister Davis of the province of Ontario is among the notables gathered to commemorate that occasion. The colorful costumes of the Highlander Band and the traditional anthems by the pipers underscore the significance of the reenactment. The ceremony concludes with the flag of the Northwest Fur Company flying once again above historic Fort Williams. Meanwhile, back at Grand Portage, Clint and Verlin have arrived. They portage right along. 9 miles through the Indian village and past another 20 miles of rapids and falls near the mouth of the Pigeon River. With spring fully arrived, nature provides some tasty supplements to voyageur rations. These spring morels, or mushrooms if you prefer, are delicious with just about anything. On Friday, May 28th, Verlin and Clint set up camp near Portage Falls. There isn't any room service, but there is cold running water, and Clint uses it to quiet his barking dogs. Verlin, sporting his growing beard, repacks their gear, disposing of all tin cans. They're about to enter international boundary waters where no tin cans are allowed. "40 miles beyond Portage Falls is Height of Land, one of the highest points above sea level on the Voyager route. Here, Clint and Verlin observe the ancient Voyager ritual of sprinkling each other with branches and promising never to kiss the other man's wife without her permission. Even in situations like these, the Voyager past cannot be avoided, for our 2 canoeists have literally baptized themselves with history. As they spend days on the Voyager trail, the feeling that they belong to the country and the country to them grows accordingly. They're slowly becoming voyageurs themselves. With the current now briefly in their favor, they travel deeper into international boundary waters, a sanctuary for wildlife, including that endangered species, the American bald eagle. These magnificent birds nest and thrive in this highly protected area. The pursuit of this animal literally opened up the Northwest. For the beaver, by never migrating and by building elaborate lodges, guaranteed his own destruction. When the white man brought iron, steel, and guns to replace the Indians' wood, rocks, and arrows, the beaver, limited to his little pond and highly visible house, could be destroyed at will. When the dams were broken to drain the ponds, and the lodges hacked apart with hatchets, there was no escape. As the population decreased, the fur seekers had to go farther into the territory to find new beaver ponds, and exploration thus advanced. Since the beaver finds his food primarily by swimming to look for it, he builds dams and backs up larger ponds to make his search easier. This makes the moose, who then has a larger pond bottom to feed on, his natural neighbor. When the beaver dams fell victim to the axes of the trappers, the food supply of the moose was also depleted, again revealing the delicate balance of nature. The moose eats the grass around the beaver pond, and his trip into the pond has a twofold purpose. It will enable him to shake himself free of pesky flies, but more importantly, it'll give him access to the water plants on the bottom of the pond. And these plants are an important item on his summer menu. The race with time now intensifies, and subtle tensions between the two canoeists begin to mount slowly, almost imperceptibly. The Bering Sea is still more than 6,000 miles ahead, and the only way to get there is to keep on going. The big question remains: can they make it before freeze-up stops them cold? Verlin and Clint now find themselves taking greater chances on the many rapids they encounter. The almost magnetic force of the swirling white water challenges them to try, disregarding their second thoughts to portage. Well, after a rough stretch of water like that, a fella's entitled to a little break, right? On June 4th, they portage through International Falls in northern Minnesota. Most natives try very hard to ignore two bearded men walking down the main street carrying a canoe and a lot of other gear. From International Falls, the route leads through Lake Winnipeg to Flin Flon. Every inch on the map represents days of hard paddling. No one can keep working that hard without some kind of a break now and then. Clint and Verlin find recreation readily available, since both enjoy fishing. And the fishing is great just about any place they try. Walleye pike are both plentiful and cooperative. They're also delicious, of course. Verlin paddles to shore and begins a fire as Clint fishes upstream. Verlin is usually in charge of the cooking chores. Catching fish from clean, fresh waters and eating them on the spot is another one of the real pleasures of their trip. As always, they bow their heads and return thanks to their God for the meal and their continuing good fortune. Farther up into Manitoba head our modern voyageurs. Verlin and Clint decide on a longer break from their journey. A few days off in Flin Flon, Manitoba might be just what they need. Flin Flon, named after a cartoon character, is the home of the world's largest copper zinc smelter works. This smelter runs full blast 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and as long as it runs, these smokestacks belch their clouds of ugly gray grunge. Flin Flon calls this the Trout Festival. But our voyageurs say this is the only trout they saw all week. Verlin's family has come from DeWitt to visit him because from this point on, there will be little opportunity. Ahead lie thousands of miles of virtually untouched timberland and an unbelievable chain of events. And Verlin will soon discover that Clint feels a growing resentment against any delay in the trip. Everybody shows up for festival time, and everybody enjoys the amateur canoe race. You can tell they're amateurs because they all want to paddle in the same piece of water, or not at all. Meanwhile, our voyageurs stopped to watch a little dance number called the Arctic Red Jig. It's sort of a combination of the Highland Fling, the turkey trot, the twist, and a good old-fashioned hot foot. Henry here has been first place winner for the past 7 or 8 years. The band on this man's forehead is called a tump line. Now, these sacks of flour are tied with leather straps, and all of the straps are hooked to the band around his head. He's carrying 850 pounds of flour and must carry it for 50 feet in order to win, which he does. The prize is uniquely appropriate. He wins all the sacks of flour he's carried over the line. The people of Flin Flon are pretty excited. It's time for their first annual rodeo. And like all wilderness events, it's pretty wild. There's Henry teaching the clown how to do the Arctic Red Jig. Maybe this horse took lessons from Henry, too. Whoops, looks like one of the cowpunchers got punched out. But Henry gets an idea. He says, "I'll ride that mean old bull," and he does, too, for 2 whole seconds. Old Henry took the cure that day. That was just too much bull for Henry. But you can't keep a good man down. Clint and Verlin had stopped for a break. Time off. Relaxation, right? Wrong. Now they enter a 3-day canoe race. On July 9th, some of the best professional canoe racing teams from the U.S. and Canada weigh in and measure canoes to meet Canadian racing specification. This race, a cross-country marathon, is one of the largest and toughest on the continent. There's the gun, and 36 madmen begin a mad scramble for a share of the $3,000 purse. Verlin calls it the challenge within the challenge. It was the physical preparation for professional racing that put them in shape for the arduous trip toward the Bering Sea. In a red canoe, they are designated Team Number 2. They do as well on land as in the water, often gaining precious ground during the portages. Jenny and the family have brought a specially designed racing canoe from home that Verlin built during the winter. Prior to the race, he and Clint trained for hours to familiarize themselves with the new canoe and with the course itself. Although similar in design, the racing canoe is 2.5 feet shorter, weighs 50 pounds less than the 110-pound canoe they're using for their trip. The heavier canoe has altered the rhythm of their strokes. And now, in this lighter one, the synchronization so necessary to professionals seems to elude them. All of the canoes in the race are homemade. Verlin and Clint are stroking well here, still in 10th place. As the race wears on, the physical conditioning produced by over 2,300 miles of canoeing begins to show. Stamina and endurance become all important. 2,300 miles, all important. Stamina and endurance, all important. Verlin and Clint are back at it again. Team number 15, the professional champions of the province of Alberta, initially had a large lead over Clint and Verlin. But after 6 hours, things have obviously changed. And the Alberta champions now trail them. As Verlin and Clint finished the first day of the race, they moved into 6th place. The second day brings more of the same. The beginning sprint at 75 strokes per minute, which eventually diminishes to one long, hard stroke every second. On the third day, they're back at it again. There are fewer portages in the last 2 legs of the 3-day race, and Clint and Verlin managed to move from 6th to 5th. At the end of the race, this Quebec team takes the $1,000 first prize and a beautiful trophy. Verlin and Clint hold their 5th place spot and collect $200 for their efforts. When the officials learn the 2 voyageurs are putting back into the water for a 4,500-mile jaunt to Alaska, you can just figure what they said. You don't have to be crazy to do something like that, but it sure must help a lot. It's time to trade this red racing canoe in for the familiar long green model. There's a lot of water between them and the Bering Sea, with only 3 months of traveling weather remaining. Just above Flin Flon is the Churchill River country, a panorama of lakes and connecting waterways. Civilization is limited to occasional Indian villages, and the nature of the trip changes again. Behind schedule, Verlin and Clint start pushing themselves even harder than before. They now think that traveling 50 miles a day is a significant accomplishment. Little do they suspect that later they will have to travel nearly twice that every day for weeks at a time. The days have worn on into midsummer, and there are 4,500 miles yet to go. Half of the anticipated ice-free time has elapsed, but 2/3 of the distance remains to be covered. The question, can they make it before freeze-up, is still unanswered. Before they began their journey, Verlin and Clint deposited $500 at the Hudson Bay Company's main post in Winnipeg. And as they stop at remote villages in their push northwards, they will carry their letter of credit as purchasing power. Pelican Narrows is truly a place of contrast. New prefab houses and timeless hand-built log cabins nestle side by side. The water at Pelican Narrows is always cold, and how these Indian lads could ever swim in it was beyond Clint. The Churchill River, in the journals of the earliest travelers to these waters, stands out as one of the best to canoe on. Meathie Portage is a 12-mile portage across a low, sandy ridge with a mile-long lake at the northern end. In crossing this height of land, Clint and Verlin enter the Arctic watershed by way of the Clearwater River. Verlin and Clint find that they are not alone. Millions of black flies have tagged along. Verlin learns you should never kill a black fly. If you do, a million other flies come to its funeral. On the morning of July 26th, our portaging voyageurs run into a group of archaeology students on a summer research project. These paths go back perhaps 10,000 years to the late Ice Age and the coming of the Indian to the North American continent. This piece of flint came from a flintlock rifle. They find these rat canoes used for muskrat trapping on the banks of the Clearwater River. After an exhausting 100-mile marathon, after tangling with the best paddlers in the U.S. and Canada, after paddling thousands of miles themselves, what do they do for rest and relaxation? Race canoes, of course. Here Clint jumps the gun and Verlin never does catch him. Waddell wins going away. But it's time to get back in that big green canoe again and head northwards. Here we see a carbon copy of Ernest Hemingway in the bow. And downriver, a little later, Hemingway in the bow chauffeurs none other than Rip Van Winkle in the stern. They experiment constantly with their diets, eating nothing but meat for 1 week and only canned vegetables and fruits for another, with a week of porridge, soups, and raisins after that. But it was pancakes that won. Laced with cornmeal, wheat germ, powdered milk, and powdered eggs, 1 pancake was good for 5 miles on the water, and only 7 pancakes could sustain the paddlers for 7 hours between meals without a stop. When Clint latches onto this mammoth northern pike, the two discuss long and hard as to who should have the honor of cleaning it. For the sake of Christian charity, the name of the appointed butcher will remain anonymous. But this is all that's left of 35 pounds of northern pike. It is now late July and the weather's turning cooler already. Some 3,000 miles are now behind them, and yet they have over 4,000 miles left to go. One of the first stops on the swift Athabasca is Fort McMurray. 10 years before their visit, Fort McMurray was a village of 2,000 people. Today, thanks to an oil refining complex, the population has tripled to 7,500. The first European voyager here was Peter Pond. The wilderness is giving way to condominiums, office buildings, new homes, and the growth is amazing. The earth seems no match for modern construction equipment. Clint and Verlin stop briefly for a look at the oil-saturated tar sand that has lured technology northward. Some may quarrel about the relationship between wilderness and so-called progress. In his book, Green Hills of Africa, Ernest Hemingway said, "A continent ages quickly when we come. The natives live in harmony with it. The earth gets tired of being exploited. A country wears out quickly unless man puts back in it all his residue and that of all his beasts. When he quits using beasts and uses machines, the earth defeats him quickly. The machine can't reproduce, nor does it fertilize the soil, and it eats what he cannot raise. A country was made to be as we found it. We are the intruders, and after we're dead, we may have ruined it, but it will still be there. And we don't know what the next changes are." From Fort McMurray, Verlin and Clint follow the Athabasca River to Fort Chipewyan. the northern end of the early traders' main route, but hardly the halfway point for our modern voyageurs. They walk into Fort Chippewayn to check on the mail that had been forwarded to them, only to find that it hasn't arrived yet. Later, they meet a direct descendant of Simon Fraser, a famous early explorer. This man has Fraser's set of bagpipes, his tobacco pouch, and carved pipe, artifacts which any Canadian museum would love to have on display. The workmanship on the tobacco pouch and the pipe reveals the great care taken by native craftsmen, and the reverence with which they are handled shows what they mean to their owner. But they couldn't stop anywhere for long now, not with so far to go and so little of the summer remaining. They step up the tempo of their paddling, making as much as 60 or 70 miles on a good day. Their muscles have long since hardened to the strain of long pulls with a minimum of rest. Their determination to reach the Bering Sea before freeze-up has grown stronger as well. But it's still a race against time, and time is getting short.